Step right up. Climb aboard. The caravan is waiting.
Hollow eyes. Somewhere between Arkansas and Oblivion, the rain began again, slow at first, then pounding like guilt on a windshield. The wipers squealed in protest, smearing greasy arcs across the glass. Outside, the trees burned in shades of dying fire. Peak autumn, the last gasp of color before the cold came for everything. Halloween was just a few weeks away, a perfect time to start his next horror novel. And yet, he was already living in one. Recently divorced, still madly in love with his ex-wife. God, even thinking that sounded wrong. Cruel. It echoed around in his head like a line from one of his own books. It sounded like horror. He'd like to meet the cynical asshole who was writing his love story. Shake his hand, then break his fucking fingers, one at a time. Allan Brooks lit a cigarette with fingers that trembled just enough to embarrass him, then muttered something bitter and unfinished. He ran a hand through his hair, unwashed and thinning, and stared out at the nothing highway through a dirty windshield. He was supposed to be writing, but the quiet had started writing back. He was supposed to be writing, not running, not hiding. A new horror novel. That was the lie he told himself when he left Missouri with nothing but a duffel bag, a box of old notebooks, and the Buick. Clear the head, he'd said. Get some quiet. Get weird with it. He had the quiet, but it was starting to feel like the quiet had him. He didn't plan on stopping. But there it was, a warped wooden sign just off the highway, nailed crooked into the wet dirt like a grave marker. Second Chance Treasures. The S was flaking. The whole thing leaned. Something in his gut curled. Not quite instinct, not quite dread. He pulled in anyway. The '91 Buick Roadmaster hissed as it settled into wet gravel, a coffin with wheels. Allan stepped out, brown and weathered dress shoes tapping like they'd wandered into the wrong decade. His coat clung to him in the rain, heavy as a bad memory. The bell above the shop door didn't ring so much as choke. Inside, the air was thick with lavender and mildew, like someone had tried to cover rot with old perfume and failed miserably. The kind of place where light didn't land. It just hovered, like it was afraid to touch anything. 2 narrow aisles, a single buzzing light overhead. Every object had been owned, broken, and discarded, and they all seemed to know it. Allan felt it too, that quiet ache of being left behind. He didn't belong anywhere anymore, but in here, among the misfits and forgotten things, he almost did. Behind the counter sat a woman who looked less alive than simply preserved. Thin, wiry hair clung to a brown-spotted scalp. Her face sagged like wet parchment. She stared through him with those dull, cloudy eyes, not at him, as though he'd already been appraised and found lacking. Allan gave her a polite nod, the kind you give at a funeral. She didn't blink. He drifted. Rows of cracked plates, stuffed animals that slumped like they remembered pain. Coats still shaped like their last wearers. Everything smelled like the inside of a throat that hadn't spoken in years. And then, he stopped. There, near the end of the aisle, perched on a splintered child's rocking chair, sat a porcelain doll. The doll sat like it had been waiting. Small, about a foot tall, maybe. Its body was stiff, molded porcelain from toe to collarbone, with thin arms jointed at the elbows and shoulders by rusted little pins. Painted-on stockings covered its legs in faded white stripes, and it wore a navy blue sailor dress, once crisp, now yellowed and moth-bitten at the hem. Its face was that unsettling kind of blank, lips just barely curled into a smirk, cheeks touched with old rouge. Its proportions were wrong. The head bulged forward, oversized for its narrow shoulders. The porcelain stretched unnaturally smooth, like dried wax over a balloon. And the eyes. Something was wrong with the eyes. They weren't glass, they were voids, bulging, pitch black, round and reflective like drops of wet oil. Not just painted, shined. They were sealed, glassy voids lacquered to a high sheen, like something organic had been preserved beneath. Looking into them was like leaning over a well and seeing nothing but yourself. Distorted. The sailor dress it wore was yellowed and thinning, the hem frayed and peppered with old moth bites. One foot was bare, the other wore a cracked, doll-sized shoe with the lace torn off. And the face, pale, faintly blushed, wore a half-smile that sat wrong on the jawline. Not cheerful, not blank, just paused, the kind of expression you see on the recently embalmed. Allan stared. It stared back. Its eyes didn't reflect. They drank the light, swallowed it whole. His throat felt dry.
"You're a writer,"
came the voice from behind, the woman rasping like gravel under tires.
"It likes writers."
Allan didn't turn. He kept staring at the doll, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Not lately," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "But yeah, I guess I used to be." He reached up, scratched the back of his neck. The air felt heavy in here, like the store hadn't been opened in years and something else had taken up residence. 2 bestsellers. That was the resume. Ashes in the Hourglass made him famous enough to get interviewed by people who didn't read. The Mare's Teeth bought him the Buick, some time off, and a brief, dangerous kind of hope. But success never made him whole. Marianne had, for a while, and then she left, without a fight, without money, without hate. Just a note and a line that still looped through his skull when the nights got too long.
"You'll always be my best friend, Allan. I love you. I'm just not in love with you. Stains of your childhood have finally started showing. And I'm a free spirit. I can't stay in that prison with you."
He didn't blame her. Hell, he understood. He'd been writing ghosts for 20 years. Eventually, he became one. Allan leaned in closer, gave the head a little tap with his nail. Click. He flinched. A soft sound came from inside the doll's head, like 2 small pieces of porcelain brushing together. Hollow. Faint. He tapped again. Click. He turned the doll over in his hands, half expecting it to blink. Something shifted inside, a faint, deliberate clicking. Allan frowned, tilted it closer to his ear. "Huh. Must be some funky sensor mechanism," he muttered. "Like those old dancing Coke cans or Christmas ornaments that play music when you walk by. Weird." The eyes still stared. Too big, too black. Behind him, the old woman spoke again, voice closer now.
"No price tag."
He flinched, hadn't heard her move. Her gums clapped wetly when she spoke, like a horse chewing through burlap. The smell of her breath reminded him of mold and pennies.
"You know, some of these things, they seem to come in here on their own. I don't even remember pricing this one."
She chuckled, a low, throaty cough of a laugh.
"My mind went a long time ago." "When exactly?" "Ha! I forgot."
Allan nodded slowly, not turning around. His eyes stayed locked on the doll, still cradled in his hands. It felt warm, or maybe his hands were just cold. He shook the thought loose.
"No price tag,"
she said again, with something like finality.
"Guess that makes it yours."
Her teeth clicked. A strand of spit clung to the corner of her mouth like a thread from something unraveling. He imagined slicing her belly open and watching a pile of beetles spill out, clicking and squirming like they'd been waiting in the dark for decades. She added, almost sweetly,
"You'll pay another way."
Allan didn't like the sound of that. Not one damn bit. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his leather wallet, cracked and soft with age, and laid a $10 bill on the counter. "I owe the devil too much already," he muttered. "Let's not start a tab." The woman didn't reach for the money. She just smiled, wide enough to show the dark between her gums. As Allan turned to leave, the bell above the door gave a strangled wheeze. The air outside felt colder than it should have. That night, Allan checked into a roadside motel off Route 167, the kind with numbered keys and crusted floral bedspreads, a slow ceiling fan, one channel of static on the TV. He set the doll on the dresser. He unzipped the side pocket of his duffel, pulled out the black and white composition book, the one with half its corners curled from rain and regret, and his old, half-sharpened pencil. This was the place he created all his demons. He opened to a fresh page. The lines stared back, clean and expectant. He wrote 2 words at the top, pressing hard enough to indent the next page. Hollow eyes. He lit a cigarette, poured 2 fingers of scotch. Didn't sit, just stood there, staring at it. The doll. Now that he had time to really see it, the details emerged like bruises beneath pale skin. There were fingernail scratches along the underside of its chin, tiny, desperate, as if something had tried to claw out. One foot was bare, the other wore a cracked porcelain shoe. The exposed foot had a thin fracture, a hairline split that ran from the ankle up, like a broken bone trying to remember how it shattered. The sailor dress was sewn shut down the back, no buttons, no zipper, as if it wasn't meant to be removed, as if what was inside was never supposed to be let out. And the eyes, those massive tar glass eyes, he could have sworn he saw movement inside. Not a twitch, not a blink, just the faintest ripple, like something shifting behind the lens, like water behind glass. He turned away, took his scotch to the bed, started to write. But the pencil scratched wrong, like the paper was resisting him. And then, click. He looked up. The doll hadn't moved, still sitting on the dresser. But the sound had come from it, he was sure. He walked over and picked it up again, gently tilting the head back. He squinted, leaning closer. Old glue warping under heat, maybe, he muttered. Or pressure cracks. Yeah, that's all it is. But then he saw the eyes. Inside those black hollows, a faint glint of movement, like water behind glass. Just once, just for a moment. Click. He tilted the doll again, ear close now. Click. Something rolled inside. Wait, not just something. Somethings. Multiple. Shifting. Like beads in a rattle, but heavier, denser. Like teeth in a jar. Maybe a loose shard, he told himself. Porcelain, cracked from time and heat. But the rhythm, it was too even, too familiar. It reminded him of something. Marianne's heels clicking in the kitchen back when she still hummed while cooking, still smiled when friends came over. The sharp, confident tap of her steps across the tile as she moved from stove to counter, glass of wine in hand. He used to love that sound. Now it lived inside this doll, and it felt wrong. Why did it sound deliberate? Allan didn't sleep much that night, but he managed to dream, disjointed flickers of ink, glass, and bare porcelain feet. By morning, the motel light was flat and gray. He drank burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup and sat at the desk with his composition book, scribbling through half a page before the words started to flow. It felt good, almost normal. He wrote all morning, dialogue, notes, a scene where a man hears his dead wife whispering from inside a doll's head. The kind of writing that used to scare him in the best way. Just after noon, he packed up, wrapped the doll back in the flannel, and slid it into the trunk next to his typewriter and duffel bag. By the time he crossed the state line, he'd almost convinced himself none of it mattered. He heard it somewhere near the Arkansas border, that low, rhythmic tick. Not a rattle, not a bump in the road. No, this was different. It came from the trunk, precise, measured, mechanical. Tick, tick, tick. Allan turned down the radio. Nothing but static anyway. The sound was faint, but it was there, repeating every few seconds, like a clock, or a heartbeat, or something else trying to keep time, trying to stay alive. He pulled over near a gas station with a flickering sign and popped the trunk. The flannel shirt he'd wrapped the doll in had come loose, or been pushed off. The doll sat upright now, legs spread slightly apart, arms forward, like it had been bracing for something. He reached out. The ticking stopped. He held the doll and gave it a gentle shake. Nothing. But when he brought it closer to his ear, click. It was inside the head again. And this time it didn't sound like porcelain. It sounded like bone. Allan shoved the doll back into the trunk, this time wrapping it in 2 shirts and stuffing it under the tire iron. Jesus, he muttered. I need sleep. Later that night, small roadside motel, room 4A. It smelled like mildew and cherry air freshener. Allan tossed his bag onto the bed and left the doll in the bathroom, face down in the sink. He figured porcelain couldn't drown, but it made him feel better. He poured himself a glass of scotch and stared into the motel mirror. The light flickered above him. His reflection stared back, older than he remembered. Eyes ringed dark, hair going grayer than he'd realized. You're cracking, Allan Brooks, he said to himself. All those years trying to forget, and you pick up the devil in a sailor dress. He didn't sleep. Not well. In the dream, he was back at the thrift store. Only it wasn't a store anymore. It was black inside, endless, lit only by dim yellow bulbs floating like fireflies in tar. Shelves stretched into nothing, each one lined with porcelain dolls. But the dolls weren't still. They moved. Each one turned slowly as he passed, heads jerking, necks twitching, eyes gleaming. But they weren't just dolls. Each one had a face, human faces, adult faces, screaming silently from behind glass eyes. He saw his own face on one of them. It blinked and whispered. It's hollow, so it can be filled. Allan woke to the sound of something tapping the bathroom mirror. Not knocking. Tapping. Light. Rhythmic. Fingernail on glass. He got up slowly, stomach tight, mouth dry. The motel room buzzed faintly. When he stepped into the bathroom, the air felt colder. The doll was no longer where he'd left it. It was sitting upright in the sink, arms bent and raised like it had been mid-crawl when he walked in. Its black eyes were locked forward, unblinking. One porcelain finger was cracked, a jagged line running from the tip of its hand to the elbow, like a split ready to burst. Allan stared at it. What the hell are you? Allan walked to the sink. His breath came in shallow, fast bursts. He closed the bathroom door, locked it, sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples like he could wipe the memory off his brain. All right. I've been drinking too much, he said aloud. That's all. Scotch and shitty sleep. And Marianne, my stability. Hell, I've had night terrors before. Whole dreams inside dreams. He looked toward the door, still closed. Or maybe it's some high-end tech prank, some computerized Chinese import. I read about that kid in Michigan, the one who hacked those AI baby monitors, made him scream in Latin at 3 a.m. He chuckled dryly, but it died in his throat, because none of that explained how the doll moved on its own, or how its black eyes had shown up in the mirror. None of it explained why it felt like something had entered the room with him and never left. His jaw tensed. The bottle was empty. He couldn't lie to himself anymore. "No," he whispered. "The thing's possessed." He went back inside the bathroom. He looked up into the bathroom mirror, and what he saw made his breath hitch. It was his face, his posture, his slack shoulders, stained collar, smoke-worn eyes. But the eyes in the reflection weren't his. They were black, deep glassy voids where his should have been, smooth and sealed, like lacquered stone, like the doll's. He blinked. The reflection blinked too, a second too late. He blinked. The mirror returned to normal. Just tired, red-rimmed Allan Brooks, ex-husband, perhaps ex-novelist, barely a person anymore. But something was different inside him now. He could feel it, like a worm curling around his brainstem. Not fear, exactly. Inspiration. He grabbed his composition book from the nightstand. He sharpened his old pencil with a pocket knife and began to scribble. The doll was found facing away. Dolls didn't move, not on their own. But this one, it always turned back toward him, watching, waiting. He paused, reached into his pocket, fished out a soft pack of Pall Malls, and shook one loose with practiced fingers. He lit the cigarette, cupped the flame like it was something sacred, then shook it out and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. He held the first drag in his lungs like it might burn the fear out. It didn't. The doll sat quietly on the dresser across the room, legs dangling like a child on a swing. He kept writing. Its eyes weren't black. They were openings, a lens, something staring through, not out. You didn't look at it. It looked at you. His pencil scratched faster. He felt like he had Marianne again. Not exactly, but that same stillness, that same pull. Maybe it was a mistake, but for now he couldn't let it go. The next motel had a blinking neon vacancy sign that buzzed like a dying fly. Room 7 smelled like Lysol and loss. Allan dropped his bag, placed the doll gently on the dresser, then set his composition book down beside the ashtray. He fished his phone from his coat pocket and set it down too, face down next to the matches and the half-burned filter of a forgotten cigarette. He pulled off his coat, rolled his shoulders. That's when he noticed it, a long rust-colored smear trailing up the sleeve of his shirt. Dry now, but unmistakable. Blood. His own? He wasn't sure. There was no pain, no cut, just the quiet, metallic mark of something he'd forgotten happening. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and opened the notebook to the last page he was working on. The page was covered in frantic, smeared writing. His own, definitely, but the sentences curved like a spiral inward. It watches through me now. Through me. He didn't remember writing that. The doll sat on the dresser beside him, head slightly tilted, as if listening. "All right," he muttered, tapping the ash. "Let's get to work." He flipped to a fresh page and began to write. Something about a girl in a sailor dress, something about a voice that sounded like a broken camera winding up. The words came in little stabs of clarity, like remembering someone else's dream. The pencil moved faster. Then, a whisper, soft, feminine, wet with static.
Cara.
Allan froze. He looked toward the bathroom. Empty. Then, click. Flash. A sharp white light burst across the room. Allan dropped the pencil, stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. "What the hell?" The light was gone. The doll hadn't moved. He looked around wildly. No camera, no phone in his hand. But he picked up the phone anyway. Checked the gallery. There it was. A new photo, time-stamped for that exact moment. Allan. Mid-stumble, eyes wide, mouth open, half lit by the flash. The angle was strange, low, like from the edge of the bed. His heart thudded. Another photo appeared. Click, flash. This one was darker, close up, blurry, a smear of skin and part of his eye. He dropped the phone. "Okay," he said aloud. "Okay, that's enough of this shit." He crossed the room and reached for the doll, but stopped. Its arms were bent at the elbows, angled just slightly forward, as if it had been cradling something a moment ago, and let it go. But there was nothing in its hands. He picked it up, turned it over. It was warm again, a little sticky. He touched his palm. His fingers came away wet with sweat. Or was it? Inside the hollow head, he thought he heard a giggle. Soft, mechanical, like a recording played backward. He gently set the doll back down, making a mental note that the arms of the doll are at its sides. The room spun like a cheap carnival ride. Allan sat on the edge of the bed, head bowed, breathing through his mouth. The air was thick, smelled like wet carpet and old sweat. He tried to write again, but the words slid sideways. His fingers cramped around the pencil. His vision doubled. With a shaky breath, he dropped the pencil and set the notebook back down on the bed. He stood up, went to the bathroom, washed his hands. The water ran pink from a cut on his palm he didn't remember getting. He scrubbed harder than necessary, like he could wash away the last few hours. The sound, the whisper, the click. He stared at his reflection, half expecting to see those black, lacquered eyes again. "I can't call the police," he muttered. "Can't throw it out, either." If this were his story, he thought, the man would have already tossed the damn thing, burned it, smashed it with a hammer. Because he wasn't a cheap writer. A cheap writer would let the guy stay, let him make dumb decisions just to keep the plot moving. But the problem was, he couldn't throw it out, because it was inspiring him. Something about it, the way it stared, the way it waited. It had shaken something loose in him. And if he could just get the words out, if he could just name it, maybe he could control it. The doll was still on the dresser, unmoving, but it felt closer than before, like gravity had shifted and everything was leaning toward it. And then, a whisper, soft, right behind his ear.
Allan!
His breath hitched. He turned, but there was no one there. Just the doll, watching. Darkness devoured him, not sleep, not fainting. Just gone. No fall, no sound, no warning. One breath standing the next. Black, total and absolute. Not the kind of dark that lives behind your eyelids. This was a silence so thick it felt like liquid, cold and slow, filling his lungs like water, drowning him in stillness. He couldn't move, couldn't think. He just existed in the nothing, held by something that hadn't blinked in centuries. Somewhere in that void, something whispered his name again.
Allan?
He was 10 again, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the 4th foster home. It was cold, smelled like damp newspaper and dog piss. He held a stuffed rabbit in his lap. Its button eyes had fallen off and he'd drawn new ones in marker. Big black circles. He whispered to it sometimes. It never answered, but it listened. From the kitchen, yelling. A man this time, big voice, thick boots.
"You're just like your mother,"
the man screamed.
"Sick in the head."
Allan didn't cry. He just stared into the rabbit's drawn-on eyes and smiled, whispering. A voice, not the man's, not his own, higher, smaller, inside his ear.
Devon, Kara, James, Sarah.
He woke on the motel floor, gasping. His mouth was dry, nose bleeding again. The TV had turned itself on, static and snow. No volume, just the light flashing across the dark room like lightning in a storm. Allan sat up slowly. The doll was on the bed now, sitting upright against the pillow. One leg folded over the other, its head tilted slightly toward him, almost curious. Its lips, porcelain and painted, looked a little parted, like they might whisper again.
Devon, Cara, James, Sarah.
He stared at it, heart thudding. "What are those?" he asked aloud. "Names?" No answer. Just the buzz of static and a soft rhythmic sound. Click, click, click. It went on for hours, sometimes louder, sometimes faint. Always there. Allan didn't sleep. He wrote, pencil dragging hard across the paper, page after page, fragmented scenes, dream logic, dialogue that didn't feel like his. The words came hot and fast, like blood from a reopened wound. By morning, the ashtray was full, his scotch was gone, and the room smelled like sweat and static. He packed the doll carefully, gently. Not because he was afraid of breaking it, but because it felt alive now, like a story he wasn't done with. The next motel had a busted ice machine and a clerk who didn't make eye contact. Room 5 was on the end. No neighbors, no noise. Perfect. Allan set the doll on the dresser again. He didn't even unwrap it this time, just peeled the flannel open and let it breathe. He was used to its presence now, like background radiation. You stopped noticing the tingling after a while. He stood there a moment, staring at it, arms crossed. "I should have thrown you out by now," he muttered. And here he was, still holding on to the thing. "Guess I'm in a cheap writer's nightmare," he said, "and the idiot is me." But the truth was harder. He couldn't throw it out. Not because he was scared, because it was inspiring him, twisting something loose inside his head, stirring old shadows, dragging up stories he thought he'd buried. And maybe, just maybe, it was because he'd always been a horror fan. And this was too good not to finish. You don't toss a story like this. You keep reading, even when you're the one on the page. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, lit a cigarette, sat down, began to write. It never blinks. That's what gets to you. You blink, you sleep. It doesn't. It waits. It learns. Halfway through the sentence, he felt it again, that pressure, behind the eyes, like something was leaning outward from inside his skull. He looked up. The doll hadn't moved, but something was off. The walls, they looked closer, just slightly, like the room had shrunk when he blinked. He stood, checked the door, locked, checked the window, nailed shut, checked the bathroom. And that's when he saw it. A hallway where the closet had been. Long, narrow, lit by bare bulbs that buzzed overhead, flickering like broken teeth. He didn't remember it being there. It wasn't there when he checked in. "All right," he said softly, voice trembling. "Okay." He should have left, turned around, called someone. Instead, he stepped forward. The carpet changed, from matted motel gray to old floral print, like something out of his childhood. The hallway felt familiar, like the first foster home. The wallpaper even had the same yellow rabbits, only now their eyes were just black circles. Hollow. He heard it again, behind him. A voice, whispering.
Allan.
He turned. The doll was standing in the hallway, not lying, standing. Its porcelain hands hung limp at its sides, the head cocked. It blinked. He stumbled backward, hit the motel wall. The hallway was gone. Back to the old stained closet door. Just a room, just his room. The doll sat on the dresser again, flannel folded neatly beneath it. But now it was holding something in its lap. His pencil. The pencil was slick with something. At first, Allan thought it was sweat. But no, it was blood. His hand was bleeding. A thin hole had opened in the web between his thumb and forefinger, clean and round like a surgical entry point. No mark, no scrape, just a tunnel. He dropped the pencil. It hit the carpet with a wet sound. Jesus. The doll sat still. Too still. It faced him now, knees together, hands folded neatly in its lap. Its eyes were brighter somehow. Deeper, reflecting more than the room should allow. He backed away and grabbed a towel from the bathroom, but when he turned around, the room had changed again. His typewriter sat on the bed. Open, smoking. Paper fed halfway through the roller, covered in black fingerprints. No ink, just blood, dozens of streaks. A message, Allan, 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 over and over down the page. His ears started to ring, and then click, flash. But there was no light this time, just the sound and the feeling, like something inside his skull had just snapped a photo of his thoughts. His vision doubled, then tripled, his own body blurred. He watched himself walk to the mirror, except he wasn't in control. His reflection didn't match his movements anymore. It blinked when he didn't, smiled when he frowned, started to bleed from both nostrils, thick red trails running down its face.
Devon, Cara, James, Sarah, Allan.
He stumbled back, slipped on the pencil, hit the dresser hard. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, just one long, jagged line cutting across his reflection's mouth like a smirk. He looked down at the doll. It was gone. No, wait. It was in his lap. Its arms stretched wide now, like it was welcoming him. He screamed and threw it. It hit the wall with a sickening crack, the sound of bone, not ceramic. He crawled to the corner, panting, shaking, bleeding. The doll lay across the room. Its face was split. Hairline fractures spidered from the forehead down through one black eye. And from the crack, something moved. Not a bug, not a mouse, a finger. Tiny, human, desperate, scratching from inside the porcelain. Allan staggered across the motel room, blood smearing behind him like a slug's trail. His face was slick with it now, nose, ears, even the corners of his mouth. He couldn't scream anymore. His jaw wouldn't open all the way. Something inside him was holding it closed. The mirror pulsed, breathing. His reflection no longer synced with him at all. It grinned like a man who just won the lottery. His grin, but wider, too wide.
Allan.
The name hit his eardrum like a nail, over and over. Inside the doll's head, from inside his head. He dropped to his knees. The doll was standing again. No question now. It moved, it walked, it followed. And it was holding something in its tiny hand, a scrap of paper. Inside his notebook, the doll wrote. The doll was hollow, so it could be filled. Allan vomited. Not bile, but porcelain chips. Jagged little shards clinking as they hit the floor. Blood followed. He screamed. No sound came out. His body seized, eyes rolled back, breath locked in his throat like a fist. The pressure in his skull swelled until it felt like his brain would split. And then, snap! Everything went black. But it wasn't unconsciousness. It was separation. His soul, or whatever was left of it, was ripped free, pulled downward, sucked screaming into something cold and brittle and ancient. And then he was somewhere else. It was dark, cramped, not silent. There was always a clicking, a faint, insect-like twitching, the sound of others, trapped like him. He floated inside the hollow head of the doll, pressed against the curved, cold shell, a prison built of porcelain. All around him were shapes, dim outlines of people, faces half-formed, trembling with the same slow, sick rhythm. He couldn't speak. Couldn't scream, but he understood. They were the clicking, each tiny twitch, each crackle inside the doll's body. It was one of them, of us, souls, stuck, dead but not gone. A woman in a navy dress stared at him without eyes. A child mouthed something wordless. A man floated upside down, his limbs spasming softly with each click. They'd all been claimed, just like him, and now the doll had room for another. Back in the motel room, his body lay still. No twitch, no breath, just the slump of limbs cooling on a stained mattress. Dead. The doll stood, walked over to the desk, picked up the composition book, the same black and white one Allan used for every story, the same one he called his monster box. It opened the notebook gently, almost lovingly, wrote a single line in Allan's own sharp pencil scrawl. The doll was hollow, so it could be filled. The thrift store smelled like dust and wet carpet. Somewhere, a ceiling fan spun with a broken blade, clicking out a crooked rhythm. A man stepped inside, mid-50s, leather satchel, long gray coat. The kind of man who'd been everywhere and didn't like any of it. He walked with purpose. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his tattered newspaper. A wiry, sinewy man with hollow cheeks, sun-spotted skin, and thin, elbowy arms that hung too long at his sides. His hair was sparse and colorless, his eyes pale and restless.
Help you find something?
Maybe.
The man said.
I collect the strange, oddities, one-of-a-kinds.
The clerk scratched his ear and smiled a bit too wide.
I got just the thing.
He led him to the back shelf, where the oldest items gathered dust like scars.
Creepy as hell this little doll is. Never seen one like it.
There, sitting perfectly still on the shelf, was a porcelain doll. Not antique white anymore, more flesh-toned, worn but deliberate. It wore a faded brown jacket and faded denim jeans. One knee was torn at the seam. A pair of wide, vintage-style glasses, thick-rimmed and slightly smudged, perched crookedly on its face. It had on only one tattered brown dress shoe, but the eyes, large and hollow-looking, too big, too black, too aware. The man tilted his head.
Looks almost human.
Most people don't last long looking at it.
The clerk said, chuckling.
But hell, you're a collector.
The man nodded, reached out, picked it up. Something like broken shards of porcelain clicked behind those too big and too black, hollow eyes.
Thanks for watching. I hope you were scared to death. If your heart's still beating, like and share. And if you dare, subscribe for more delicious horror. We'll be waiting, right here in the dark.